Josh of the Ettingermentum newsletter. You wrote this piece back in March that I've been wanting to have you on to discuss for a while now, the modern electoral history of transphobia. Thanks so much for coming on. I cite it all of the time when I hear from liberals about how being strong on trans issues, protecting trans people, is somehow a liability at the ballot box.
Yeah, that's like, it was really strange doing the research with this and even like kind of thinking about it beforehand, because that was such a strong myth. People would just say out of hand, like, oh, all these woke policies, like bathrooms, like that's what's killing Democrats. But like, if you just looked at a very cursory history of the times that this has been a major electoral issue, it's been terrible for Republicans. It's not just in blue states. Like my approach for it is I went from like 2015 basically to the present day, starting in North Carolina and to the 2022 midterms. And I wanted to give kind of a balanced kind of like story, like, oh, this is where it's worked, this is where it hasn't. But when I was doing research, I couldn't find a single example of where it was successful. All of the times where they've attempted these, like making transphobia a major issue of political campaigns, it has basically ended in failure. And I thought that, like, just putting that like in a timeline could be an effective way of kind of definitively showing that this is not really the issue people think it is politically.
Well, let's go through that timeline then, and talk a bit about those early losses and when the issue of trans people started cropping up within the right-wing legislative movement. North Carolina's bathroom bill is the time, I would say, that the right planted their flag on this issue and tried to make it a thing. And this was a bit of a ramp up period because this bathroom bill at the time, I remember it was condemned and CEOs started to say we're not going to do business in North Carolina and things like that, which sounds probably a bit foreign to people now, given how widely spread these state legislature-driven trans-affirming care bills and drag bans, how I would say widespread they are. But just take us back to that time period in North Carolina and the context of how that started.
Yeah, so, well, like they've been pushing bathroom bills specifically starting around the early, like, 2010s and 2013. 2013. It was this organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a very like influential Christian conservative and like classified as a hate group by I think the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they created model legislation for these bathroom bills, and they hadn't actually been passed anywhere. But what was going on in North Carolina is that Republicans there had tremendous levels of legislative control. They had super majorities, they had the governorship. And they were considered by national movement conservatives as a laboratory state to pass these sorts of like the most far right policies to see basically what they would do to test them out. There were other states like this, like Wisconsin with anti-labor legislation and Kansas with tax cut legislation were also seen as laboratories. But North Carolina was sort of the electoral and social issues laboratory for them. It was one of the first places they passed voter ID laws. So you can't separate this push from the other like parts of the right-wing project. And the first move was made by the Charlotte City Council, basically. You can like, this is all like inside of the story. I'm just kind of looking back at it, where they passed a bill that would like kind of establish prohibiting discrimination on gender identity in their public accommodations. And the government there in North Carolina freaked out about this. They passed a bill that took total local control out of how like local municipalities could handle this. And they also outlawed like changes in the minimum wage. It was just a kind of a power grab. And like you said, it created a huge backlash. It was considered a very new thing. It was a totally new issue. Nobody understood why like they were going so hard on it. And with businesses, they understood it basically as, well, the state is mandating discrimination. We can't like really advertise ourselves as being in the state if we're abiding by these policies. And it cost the state $4 billion. And that's a low estimate. It was a massive economic hit. And that was how the first kind of battle of this was colored, where it was seen as sort of an economic issue. And but even that kind of clouds what the right was trying to do here, where their mindset was, they'll try to make this an economic issue, but we're so on the public opinion, we're so right on that we're just going to win either way. And that didn't work. And they lost the North Carolina governorship to admittedly a very strong and popular candidate, Roy Cooper, who campaigned largely on this issue, even as Trump won the state. So there was 50,000 to maybe 100,000 Trump voters in North Carolina who voted for a Democrat in that election over this issue. So
this was 2016, right, Josh? I mean,
so 2016.
Democrats did not do well almost, anywhere.
No.
Except for in this situation and the explicit context of, Roy Cooper running, rejecting the transphobia versus his opponent, McCrory.
Yeah, this is a really amazing fact. McCrory was the sole incumbent Republican in the entire country to lose in a state that Trump won.
Wow.
There was not a single other Republican running in a Trump state that lost in 2016 besides him.
And I mean, so that you can see, and you can't draw a causal connection there, obviously, but one of the data points is that voters were not moved enough by transphobia to re-elect McCrory, they instead...
They were moved in the other direction.
Yeah.
And McCrory was very popular. He won by 12 points in his first election. He won the city of Charlotte. He was considered a moderate, pro-business Republican. He was the mayor of Charlotte, actually, which is kind of unimaginable now. And his reputation got destroyed by this, and it's caused him to lose a race he absolutely should have won. Incumbent governors rarely lose. They especially don't lose when the president is carrying their state in a presidential year. We haven't really seen a result like it since. And Cooper has remained very popular. He won re-election even as Trump won the state in 2020. So it's not just he's a strong candidate, but he never could have won if it weren't for them making that stance. And that was how the issue got introduced really to the country and to the Republican Party. And it really clouded their perceptions of it for the next couple of years during Trump's tenure.
Yeah, and you can so then that's how this issue was introduced. It was a failure for at least the governor, the election for the governorship in North Carolina in terms of the Republicans' point of view here. But people then will say, okay, this was before there really was a national narrative about trans people. Trump had just gotten elected. They were beginning to talk about trans people in a derogatory manner, but there was not the just tidal wave of transphobia that we saw in 2022. Let's talk, though, about that period in the early Trump administration when there were also losses with transphobia being on the ballot.
Yeah, there was some stuff here with Roy Moore in Alabama and the 2017 gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia. But the one that I really think is important here is because this was explicitly recognized as a turning point by the anti-trans PACs, like this one group I found everywhere, the American Principles Project, which is a really funny group. They were founded to advocate for a return to the gold standard, and they really got obsessed with trans stuff about 5 years ago. But in 2019 there was another governor's race, and this time in Kentucky, where a Republican governor there, Matt Bevin, was incredibly unpopular. He had he had major clashes with the teachers in his state. It's traditionally more Democratic down ballot, so he was considered vulnerable. The Democrats there nominated the sitting attorney general, this Andy Beshear, who is the son of a very popular former governor of the state. So he was a strong candidate, sort of similarly to Cooper. And it was considered to be a race Republicans had a real shot of losing, even though it was in Kentucky, because the incumbent was just that unpopular. And what they did here, and this was, you can read articles from before the race, they explicitly used this election as a place to test out a new kind of transphobia as a wedge issue. And it's not just conjecture here. The groups here were explicitly saying, yes, the bathroom stuff didn't work. People aren't moved by that. They think we're weird for even bringing it up. But when we talk about boys and girls sports, that is our new angle. We're going to run these ads and do this, and we have proof that it changes things. So they explicitly laid down the gauntlet in this race in Kentucky. And this was a race Republicans were leading in the polls in by the time of the election. And they said this was going to change the race by 4 to 7 points. which is a massive swing.
Right.
Like Biden won in 2020 by only 4 points. If like that could have swung the entire election to Trump if this was really that effective. And it failed. Bevin lost as an incumbent. Bashir beat him. And this like campaign, like first it failed in North Carolina, which it's going to say, granted, that's a relatively moderate purple state. But Kentucky is like one of the reddest states in the country.
Voted for Trump by 30 points. Voted for Trump by 30 points.
If there's any place on the planet where right-wing wedge issues should be effective, it would be there. And like I kind of am planning on following this up because Bashir looks he's on the ballot next month because Kentucky has election years the year before presidential races. And they're doing the same exact strategy again. And a poll recently showed Bashir up by 16 points. So it didn't work then, and it's not working now. And that was a really weird moment for these kinds of groups because they explicitly laid down this as their test case, and it totally just did not work.
Yeah, and I mean,
and there wasn't even a business angle here. It was just purely culture.
Exactly, and then the national narrative is beginning to ramp up. People are becoming more aware of trans people in general. The other examples you cite in this period, the Roy Moore loss in Alabama, but I think you can't draw more conclusion from that. I would say, given the fact that he was accused credibly of basically being a pedophile, and then
it didn't save him from that. The transphobia didn't save the pedophilia accusations.
Yes, right, and then in New Jersey and Virginia there were two governorship losses for Republicans. A Democrat was elected in New Jersey, Phil Murphy, and then in Virginia as well. But those were right, but those their opponents kind of shied away from transphobia, so it's a data point, but it's not necessarily, I would say, the example that wins the day here, which is the Andy Bashir case. And then we get to 2020 and 2022, and I would say where your piece go ahead.
If you don't mind, if I could go back to the 2017 races. One thing that I found that was very interesting in those were races where Republicans did moderate on the issue a little more, and you could say they lost both races by pretty big margins. It didn't make an impact, but they actually won between the two states, 3 congressional districts that voted for Democrats in 2018. So the moderation of those issues you could have said, helped them a little bit. And I calculated it that like if those districts had voted for Republicans the next year, they could have very well won the House in 2020. But they didn't because there were 3 incumbents in all those across those 3 states that all won their re-elections.